Some secrets aren't buried to protect the guilty. They're buried to protect the family. That was the thought that kept returning to me the night everything began to unravel. The Harrison estate had stood on the same hill for more than a century, overlooking acres of rolling land and ancient oak trees that seemed to remember things people had long forgotten. On that evening, the massive dining room glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, casting warm light across the long oak table where 3 generations of the family had gathered for dinner. Harrison sat silently at the far end, his weathered face unreadable as he stared into a glass of water. Isabel poured wine beside David with practiced elegance, while Ethan lingered near the staircase, watching the room more carefully than anyone realized. Eleanor sat beneath the chandelier, her pastel cardigan soft against the dark backdrop of polished wood and old portraits. She barely touched her meal. Something about her silence felt heavier than usual. The conversation drifted from business investments to renovation plans for the East Wing, but nobody seemed fully present. Even James, the loyal family caretaker who had served the family for decades, moved through the room with unusual caution. Then Ethan excused himself and disappeared into the library. 20 minutes later, he returned carrying something covered in dust. At first, nobody paid attention. Old houses collected forgotten things. That was nothing unusual. But when Ethan placed a faded envelope on the dining table, every sound in the room seemed to vanish. "I found this inside the wall behind a bookshelf," he said. Harrison slowly lifted his eyes. For the first time all evening, his expression changed. Ethan carefully unfolded the brittle paper. The handwriting was old, elegant, and unmistakably personal. "If you're reading this," he read aloud, "Victoria already won." The words settled over the room like a storm cloud. David frowned. Isabel stopped pouring wine. Eleanor's hand trembled so slightly most people would have missed it. But Ethan noticed. He noticed everything. "Who wrote it?" he asked. Nobody answered. Harrison stared at the letter. Eleanor looked down at her plate. Even James seemed frozen. Ethan glanced around the room, confused by the reaction. It was only a letter. Yet every face carried the same shadow of recognition. The same fear. Outside, the wind brushed against the tall windows of the estate. Inside, a secret that had remained hidden for decades had just taken its first breath. And although nobody at that table was ready to admit it, the past had already started coming back. The dinner ended shortly after that, but nobody left the room immediately. It was as if the letter had changed the temperature of the house itself. Ethan remained standing beside the table, studying each face carefully. He had expected questions, maybe even laughter. Instead, he found silence. Harrison was the first to rise. Without saying a word, he folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and walked toward the hallway. The old floorboards creaked beneath his boots. For a moment, Ethan considered following him, but something stopped him. Harrison had spent years perfecting the art of revealing nothing. Tonight was no different. Eleanor remained seated long after everyone else drifted away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the letter resting at the center of the table. The expression on her face was not shock. It was recognition. That frightened Ethan more than anything. Upstairs, the estate settled into its usual nighttime rhythm. The grandfather clock echoed through the corridors. Wind brushed against the tall windows overlooking the grounds. Yet beneath those familiar sounds, something felt different. Ethan could sense it. The house no longer felt like a place preserving history. It felt like a place hiding it. Unable to sleep, he wandered through the West Wing shortly after midnight. Most of the lights were off, leaving only pools of golden light beneath antique wall sconces. As he passed the library, he noticed a faint glow beneath the door. Someone was inside. Carefully, he stepped closer. Through the narrow opening, he saw Eleanor sitting alone at the large mahogany desk. In front of her lay a faded photograph. Her fingers traced the edge of the image with surprising tenderness. Ethan could not see the picture clearly, but he recognized the face immediately. It was the same woman from the photograph he had discovered earlier that evening. Then Eleanor did something unexpected. She opened a drawer and removed a second envelope. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Her shoulders trembled slightly. Finally, she whispered a name. "Margaret." The sound was barely audible, but Ethan heard it. A chill ran through him. Margaret, the same name written faintly on the back of the photograph. Before he could move closer, Eleanor carefully returned both items to the drawer and locked it. When she looked toward the door, Ethan stepped back into the darkness. He waited until the library light disappeared. Only then did he return to his room. Lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, he repeated the name over and over. Margaret. Whoever she was, the letter had not brought a secret into the house. It had awakened one that had never truly left. The next morning, the Harrison estate looked exactly as it always had. Sunlight spilled across the stone terrace. The gardens stretched across the property in perfect order. The staff moved quietly through the halls. Anyone arriving from the outside would have seen a family living a comfortable, predictable life. Ethan knew better. He had barely slept. The name Margaret remained in his thoughts from the moment he opened his eyes. During breakfast, he watched Eleanor carefully. She sat near the end of the long table, stirring her tea without drinking it. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Across from her, David scrolled through business reports on his tablet, while Isabel spoke about an upcoming charity event. Their conversation sounded normal, but Ethan noticed something strange. Every time the previous evening came close to being mentioned, the room shifted. People changed subjects. They looked away. They became interested in something else. It was subtle, but it happened every time. After breakfast, Ethan decided to search the estate archives. The Harrison family had preserved records for generations. Old deeds, letters, newspaper clippings, tax records, and photographs filled an entire room above the library. Dust floated through narrow beams of light as he opened cabinet after cabinet. Hours passed. Most of what he found was exactly what he expected. Property transactions, family weddings, newspaper articles celebrating business successes. Then he found something unusual. Hidden inside a folder labeled Historical Land Surveys was a collection of documents that did not belong there. The papers were nearly 40 years old. One name appeared repeatedly: Margaret Vale. Ethan sat down immediately. His pulse quickened as he continued reading. There were references to charitable donations made in her name, legal correspondence mentioning confidential family matters. Then he found something even stranger. Several pages had been removed from the file. Entire sections were missing. Someone had deliberately taken them. As he studied the remaining documents, a voice startled him from behind. "You should stop digging." Ethan turned. James stood in the doorway holding a box of records. The old caretaker rarely involved himself in family affairs. That alone made the warning significant. Who was Margaret Vale? Ethan asked. James hesitated. For a brief moment, genuine concern crossed his face. Some questions bring peace when they stay unanswered. Ethan leaned forward. Did she belong to this family? James lowered his eyes. That is exactly the question everyone has spent years trying not to answer. Before Ethan could ask another question, James quietly left the room. Ethan looked back at the documents spread across the desk. For decades, someone had been protecting a secret connected to Margaret Vale. And for the first time, he was beginning to suspect that the missing pieces of the story were far more important than the pages that remained. That afternoon, rain clouds gathered above the estate, covering the sky in a blanket of gray. Ethan remained in the archive room long after everyone else had returned to their routines. The documents mentioning Margaret Vale were spread across the desk in front of him. The more he read, the less sense the story made. According to public records, Margaret had lived in the county for years. Her name appeared in charity events, social columns, and even local historical reports. Then, almost overnight, every reference stopped. It was as if she had simply vanished from the town's memory. Ethan copied several names and dates into a notebook before leaving the archive. Instead of returning to the main house, he drove 15 miles into town and visited the County Historical Society. The building was small, quiet, and nearly empty. A retired librarian greeted him and helped him search through decades of newspaper records. For nearly 2 hours, he found nothing new. Then a photograph caught his attention. It showed a fundraising gala from more than 40 years earlier. Several familiar faces stood smiling beneath a banner. A younger Eleanor was there. So was Thomas. To Ethan's surprise, Harrison appeared in the background as well. Standing beside Eleanor was a young woman with striking features and bright eyes. The caption identified her as Margaret Vale. Ethan stared at the image. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Margaret looked remarkably similar to someone he already knew. He could not immediately place it, but the feeling stayed with him. After making a copy of the photograph, he returned to the estate just before sunset. The house was unusually quiet. As he entered through the side door, he noticed voices coming from Harrison's study. The door was slightly open. Ethan recognized Thomas speaking in a low voice. The longer this continues, the harder it becomes to control. Harrison answered after a long pause. It was never supposed to be controlled forever. Ethan froze. Through the narrow opening, he could see folders spread across the desk. One of them carried a familiar label, Margaret Vale. Before he could hear more, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Ethan stepped away and continued walking as if he had heard nothing. Later that evening, while everyone gathered for dinner, he studied each person around the table again. Then his eyes settled on Lily. Suddenly, the resemblance struck him. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the same features he had seen in the old photograph. For the first time, Ethan began to wonder whether Margaret's story was not buried in the past at all. Perhaps a part of it was sitting at the table with them every single day. The resemblance haunted Ethan throughout the next day. He told himself it was coincidence, the kind of connection people imagine after staring at old photographs for too long. Yet every time he looked at Lily, the feeling returned. During lunch, she sat near the large bay window overlooking the gardens, reading quietly while sunlight illuminated her features. The similarity was undeniable. Not identical, but familiar enough to raise questions that refused to disappear. Determined to find answers, Ethan reached out to Sophia, a young attorney he had known since college. Unlike most people connected to the Harrison family, Sophia was not intimidated by wealth, reputation, or old traditions. When he showed her copies of the documents and the photograph, she studied them carefully. "Someone spent a great deal of effort hiding this," she finally said. "People do not remove records unless they are afraid of what those records reveal." Together, they began searching public archives, property filings, and historical legal records. Hours passed before Sophia discovered something unusual. A family trust amendment had been filed decades earlier. Most of the document remained sealed, but one detail stood out. An unnamed beneficiary had been removed shortly before a major inheritance transfer occurred. The date matched the period when Margaret's name disappeared from public records. Ethan felt a chill. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Later that evening, he returned to the estate carrying copies of everything they had found. As he entered through the front hall, he noticed Eleanor standing alone beside the grand staircase. She appeared exhausted. Her silver curls framed a face weighed down by memories she no longer seemed capable of carrying. For a moment, Ethan considered confronting her directly. Instead, he approached gently. "Did Margaret ever live here?" he asked. Eleanor closed her eyes. The question seemed to drain what little strength remained in her. Several long seconds passed before she answered. "Some people leave a house," she said quietly. "Others never truly leave at all." Then she walked away before he could ask another question. That night, Ethan sat alone in the library reviewing the trust documents again. As midnight approached, he noticed something he had overlooked earlier. Scribbled beside one reference number was a handwritten note. The ink had faded with age, but the words remained readable. "Protect the heir at all costs." Ethan stared at the sentence. Not protect the family, not protect the estate, protect the heir. Suddenly, the mystery shifted in his mind. Perhaps this was never about hiding someone who had disappeared. Perhaps it was about protecting someone who still existed. And if that was true, Lily might be connected to a story far larger than anyone had ever imagined. The following morning, Ethan woke with a single question repeating in his mind. If someone had spent decades protecting an heir, why did nobody ever speak about that person openly? The answer seemed obvious. Because the truth threatened someone powerful. He spent most of the day reviewing every document Sophia had uncovered. The missing beneficiary, the sealed trust amendment, the handwritten note. None of it pointed to a random mistake. It pointed to a deliberate decision made long ago. Late that afternoon, Ethan noticed Harrison leaving the estate alone. That was unusual. Harrison rarely explained where he was going, and nobody ever asked. Acting on instinct, Ethan followed from a distance. The drive led beyond town, past rolling fields and quiet roads, until Harrison finally stopped at a small cemetery surrounded by old maple trees. Ethan parked farther away and watched. Harrison walked slowly toward a modest headstone near the back of the property. There were no flowers, no visitors, no signs that anyone came there often. Yet Harrison stood before it for nearly 20 minutes. When he finally stepped aside, Ethan moved closer after he left. The inscription was simple: Margaret Vale. Ethan stared at the name. So she had not vanished completely. She had been here all along. As he turned to leave, something caught his attention. Tucked behind the headstone was a small weathered box. Inside rested several folded letters tied together with a faded ribbon. Ethan hesitated before opening the first one. The handwriting matched the letter discovered inside the wall. His pulse quickened. Most of the contents were personal reflections, memories, and family concerns. Then one sentence changed everything. If anything happens, Harrison promised he would protect her place in the family. Ethan read the line 3 times. Harrison, not Victoria, not Thomas. Harrison. Suddenly, years of assumptions began to shift. Throughout the investigation, Harrison had appeared suspicious because he knew too much and revealed too little. But what if he had never been protecting a secret for his own benefit? What if he had been protecting someone else? That evening, Ethan returned to the estate carrying copies of the letters. During dinner, he watched Harrison more carefully than ever. The old man sat quietly at the far end of the table, listening while others discussed business and investments. For the first time, Ethan noticed something different. Harrison was not guarding power. He was guarding a promise. Across the room, Victoria entered unexpectedly and took her seat with calm confidence. The moment she appeared, Harrison's expression hardened. It lasted only a second, but Ethan saw it clearly. And in that instant, he realized he may have been looking at the wrong person all along. For the next 2 days, Ethan said nothing about what he had discovered. He watched. He listened. The Harrison estate had become a place where every conversation seemed to carry 2 meanings. One spoken aloud and one carefully hidden beneath the surface. The tension became impossible to ignore. Eleanor was changing. The quiet woman who had spent years avoiding difficult conversations now seemed exhausted by the weight she carried. Her hands trembled when she reached for her teacup. She forgot simple things. Twice she called Lily by another name before quickly correcting herself. Both times, a shadow crossed her face. Ethan noticed. So did Harrison. Late one evening, after most of the household had gone to bed, Ethan found Eleanor sitting alone in the sunroom overlooking the gardens. Rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling above them. She was holding an old photograph in her lap. This time she did not try to hide it. "You knew her," Ethan said gently. Eleanor stared at the photograph for several seconds before speaking. "She was the kindest person I ever knew." Her voice sounded distant, as though she were speaking from another lifetime. Ethan sat across from her. What happened to Margaret? The question lingered between them. Eleanor closed her eyes. For a moment, he thought she would refuse to answer again. Instead, a tear slipped down her cheek. Everything that happened afterward began with fear, she whispered. Fear of losing money, fear of losing power, fear of losing control. Ethan remained silent. He sensed she was finally approaching a truth she had spent decades avoiding. Margaret trusted the wrong people, Eleanor continued. And some people believed they had the right to decide who belonged in this family and who did not. Ethan immediately thought of Victoria. The name was never spoken, but the implication felt unmistakable. Eleanor looked toward the dark garden beyond the glass. There were meetings, documents, decisions made behind closed doors. By the time I understood what was happening, it was already too late. Ethan leaned forward. Too late for what? Eleanor gripped the photograph tightly. Her shoulders shook as she fought to regain her composure. Then she finally revealed the piece of information everyone had been protecting. Margaret was not an outsider, she said. She was family. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Every theory he had considered suddenly seemed incomplete. Eleanor lowered her eyes. And there was a child. The room fell silent. Rain continued tapping against the glass overhead. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. A child. An heir. Suddenly, every missing document, every sealed record, every warning and secret took on an entirely new meaning. Before he could ask another question, Eleanor stood and slowly walked toward the door. Just before leaving, she turned back toward him. If the truth comes out now, she said quietly, everything Victoria built could disappear. Then she left him alone with the photograph and a mystery that had become far larger than he had ever imagined. The revelation followed Ethan everywhere. A child, an heir, someone whose existence had been carefully pushed into the shadows while another version of the family history was allowed to stand in plain sight. The next morning, he met Sophia in her office before sunrise. Together, they reviewed everything they had collected over the past week. The photographs, the trust documents, the letters. Eleanor's confession had transformed a collection of clues into a clear direction. For the first time, they knew what they were looking for. By midday, Sophia called with news. Hidden inside a sealed court archive was a reference to a confidential guardianship arrangement established decades earlier. Most of the details remained protected, but one line immediately caught her attention. The arrangement had been connected to Margaret Vale and an unnamed minor. Ethan felt his heart race. The missing child had existed. There was now official proof. That evening, the family gathered once again in the massive dining room. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the long oak table, while conversation drifted between business matters and social obligations. Ethan barely listened. Across the room, Lily laughed at something David said. The sound was warm and genuine. She seemed completely unaware of the storm surrounding her. Ethan studied her carefully. The more he looked, the more impossible it became to ignore the similarities between her and the woman in the old photographs. During dessert, Sophia arrived unexpectedly at the estate carrying a folder. The room immediately grew quiet. Harrison looked up from his seat. Eleanor's hands tightened around her teacup. Victoria's expression remained calm, but Ethan noticed a flicker of concern in her eyes. Sophia placed the folder on the table. I found enough documentation to establish a biological connection between two branches of the family that were separated decades ago, she said carefully. Nobody spoke. The silence felt enormous. Then she slid several pages across the table. The documents were not dramatic. No raised voices followed. No accusations. Just paper, dates, names, records. Yet those pages carried more weight than anyone wanted to admit. David reviewed them first. Isabel leaned closer. Thomas adjusted his glasses and read in silence. Harrison closed his eyes briefly as though he had been expecting this moment for years. Only Victoria remained perfectly still. Ethan looked toward Lily. Confusion had replaced her smile. She did not fully understand what she was seeing yet, but she understood one thing. Her life was changing. As the documents passed around the table, a truth that had remained hidden for decades quietly entered the room. And for the first time, nobody could pretend it did not exist. No one left the dining room for a long time after the documents were read. The chandeliers continued to glow above the table, illuminating faces that seemed older than they had only an hour earlier. The silence felt different now. The mystery was no longer hidden behind rumors and fragments. It was real. Lily sat motionless, staring at the papers in front of her. For most of her life, she had believed she understood where she came from. Now that certainty had disappeared. Across the table, David looked equally unsettled. Years of family history suddenly seemed incomplete. Isabel remained quiet. Even Thomas, who had spent decades protecting legal secrets, appeared exhausted. Harrison finally stood. Every eye in the room turned toward him. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then he looked directly at Lily. "Your mother deserved better," he said softly. The words landed with unexpected weight. Eleanor lowered her head and quietly wiped away a tear. Harrison walked to the fireplace and rested one hand against the mantel. "Margaret never wanted power," he continued. "She never cared about money. She cared about family. That was always enough for her." His voice remained calm, but decades of regret lingered beneath every word. Slowly, the story that had been hidden for so many years emerged. Margaret had been pushed aside when influential people decided her place in the family was inconvenient. Records were altered. Opportunities disappeared. A different version of history was allowed to grow. Harrison had promised to protect what remained, including the future of a child who deserved recognition. He had spent years honoring that promise in silence. Across the room, Victoria said nothing. For the first time since Ethan had begun his search, she offered no explanations and no objections. The documents spoke for themselves. The truth no longer required anyone's permission. As the evening came to an end, something unexpected happened. Nobody argued about money. Nobody discussed inheritance percentages. Nobody demanded control. Instead, they sat together surrounded by the evidence of choices made long ago. The weight of the past was finally visible to everyone. Later that night, Ethan stepped onto the terrace overlooking the dark grounds of the estate. The wind moved gently through the trees. Behind him, the house stood exactly where it always had. The stone walls had not changed. The gardens had not changed. Yet everything inside felt different. Some secrets survive for generations because people fear what the truth might destroy. But sometimes the truth returns for a different reason. Not to destroy a family, to give it a chance to become honest. Inside the house, Eleanor looked through an old photograph one final time before placing it carefully beside Margaret's letters. For the first time in decades, she smiled. The burden she had carried for so long was finally gone. And as dawn approached the horizon, the Harrison family began writing a new chapter, not built on silence, but on the truth that had patiently waited all those years to come home.